firstly, I have no formal education in education. I have no formal education in human factors. But how I hit across this, I guess, was, well, firstly, I had to set up the South Australian Liver Transplant Unit and had to figure out a way to do that, to bring a lot of people together in a very low volume environment. And I guess there are a lot of lessons learned in that era in the early 90s. I had the privilege to work with a few tyrants in Europe and the United Kingdom, and I learned a lot from them about what to do and also some stuff about what not to do. I, for some reason or other, ended up as the head of division in surgery at Flinders 15 years ago on September the 1st, so that's quite a long time. And this happened quite suddenly, and in the interview with the CEO, I was asked how I would manage the finances of the system. And I said to her, looked her in the eye, and I said, I have absolutely no idea about finance. I can't manage quality from the bottom right-hand corner of the balance sheet. But what I will sign up to is to deliver quality care by whichever measure we wish to establish, and that's the goal. That will be the aim. And then, having quite unexpectedly been given the job, I then had to figure out how to do that. And so the interest in human factors came from trying to learn how to bring the people in the division together with an alignment to create a culture that is very different to the culture you described. And I would be horrified if someone from Flinders could describe such a thing. It's such an anathema to everything that I believe in. It's, I mean, everything does emanate from the culture, and culture does destroy everything if it's a bad culture, whereas if it's a very positive culture, good things happen. And so then I happened across a method, I suppose, of doing business in the sense of how to systematically go about improving healthcare. And this was designed on Brent James in Mountain Healthcare in the United States. And that's something well worth following up and learning about. But that was part of it, and then standardisation of healthcare was another part of it. But the thing that underpinned it was really the human interaction. So I developed a bit of an interest in human interaction and sort of delved into it more and more to try and figure out why people did what they did, how we could minimise error, how we could maximise efficiency and good behaviour, all that sort of thing. So this is the not the combination, but it's part of the journey. So I'm sure you've all seen definitions of human factors, but essentially it's how humans react to the environment, to information, to the design of the systems in which they work. Situational awareness, perception of elements in the environment, decision making when there's more than one option. This is sort of a cut down version of talks I've given before, but in healthcare particularly, but in any industry you like, three major error producing tendencies: perception, assumption and communication. I'm not going to talk much about communication because that is a whole field all on its own, or assumption, but particularly perception. We do often, and particularly as we get older and we become aware of pattern recognition, we fall into the trap of hearing what we want to hear rather than hearing what is told. We often see what we want to see and read, bizarrely, what we expect to read. We interpret information from the environment in terms of expectation. We have a tendency to see what we expect to see, and this is known as involuntary authenticity. And I will show a quite devastating example, unfortunately, from aviation. I know aviation and healthcare are not necessarily the same, but the lessons from aviation are good because, at least in aviation, everything's recorded, conversations are recorded, the technical stuff is recorded, so it's sort of possible to recreate. And because of that, there is some accuracy. So have a look at that. none of those words, or very few, if any, are spelled correctly. But you were able to read that as though they were completely normal words. So can is spelled correctly, but you can, as long as the first and last letter are in the right place, you can read that almost as quickly, if not as quickly as if it was all spelled correctly. Now a little exercise after a bit of wine and some cold chops. I want you to count the F's, 15 seconds, just count the F's in that sentence. And the answer is? 3. Who said 3? Hands right up. 4, 5, 6. One person. There's the answer. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when you see this for the first time, I mean, David, this is the second or third time I've shown it to you, you still don't get the right answer. we missed the F's in of, and there are 3 ofs there. And so you tend to only count 3. 7, who's it 7? It was a manufactured one. Anyway, the point of the exercise being that some things we can pick out really easily and some not quite so easily, even though they're all embedded in the same sentence or scenario or environment. It doesn't matter, it's just an example. The other thing, don't read through this because this was designed for a general surgical audience, so don't worry too much about the detail of it. But we all tend to overestimate our abilities. There is an inherent tendency to do that. So let's have another little exercise. How many of you believe you are a below average driver? 1? 1.5? How many of you believe you're an above average driver? Okay. How many of you believe you are there non-surgeons? Who are the non-surgeons in the audience? There's a few. Okay. So how many of the surgeons believe that you're an above average surgeon? Of course we do. But the reality is that, like any system, it follows a normal distribution. And half of this will be this way, and half of this will be that way, whatever it is. And there will be very few. There'll be Formula 1 drivers who are up here, and there'll be a craniofacial surgeon down here. But most of us will be concentrated around here in what we otherwise recognise as a normal distribution. But the vast majority of us, and so we'll restrict ourselves to healthcare now, believe that we actually sit in this bit and mostly in that bit without actually realising that we go across the whole range. Depends how you measure it, of course. So, have a look at this picture. We also have struggled to interpret things when they're not quite orientated in the way we think they should be. So, are there any significant differences between those faces? Sorry? Your eyes? Now, I can promise you the faces are not changing, just the orientation and how different it looks. So when we're looking at it in the proper orientation, when I first saw this, I had no idea that these smiles were so different and the expressions on the faces were so different. In other words, how we perceive these faces depends upon their orientation. Okay, let's move on. Now, have anyone seen this before? That square and that square are the same shade. But we see it differently because of the shadowing effect of that. Now, I can't demonstrate it to you very well on here because you need to actually get this and cut it all out and put it, and they're the same. So when you draw a line between the two, suddenly it becomes, or a bridge, suddenly it becomes obvious. So the perception is completely different. What do you see there? A duck or a rabbit? So we'll go back. So depends which way you look at this. See, if that can be the eye of the rabbit and the nose and the ears, or it can be a duck. And it all depends. How many immediately saw both animals? Okay. So it varies. Parallel lines or not? So do they look parallel, or are you just saying that because I put it up there? If you draw a ruler, put a ruler actually standing where I'm standing, it's very easy, they're very obviously parallel. But sitting out there, they don't look parallel at all. Circle or coil, I promise you, they're all circles. Now, stare at the cross. I have no idea why this happens, but it does. All this is just telling you that the mind plays tricks, and what we see is not necessarily what there is. And this is the assessing or addressing cognitive bias through visual cues, being aware that what we, and so what I put this together for originally was around recognition of biliary anatomy during the performance of the laparoscopic cholecystectomy, trying to illustrate to people that what they see is not necessarily what there is, and that they have to address this, so with a human factors knowledge, to say, okay, let's be sure that what it is, or what I think I see is what it really is, which we can do with radiology, which is a cholangiogram. But it's really, this has been an argument that's been raging in general surgery for 20 years and beyond. And what I've tried to do is come at it from a completely different direction, from human factors knowledge, to actually say it's not about being an expert, it's not about your professionalism, it's actually the mind plays tricks. So the more ways we can develop, firstly of understanding that, and secondly developing techniques to overcome it and look at it from a different perspective, the less likely we are to create making. Now, this is an aircraft example, and this is about involuntary automaticity. Boeing aircraft will require a 15-degree flap extension to take off at the designated speed. It's something like 140 miles per hour. Gauges in the cockpit indicate the 15-degree of flap extension and a green light indicating that the flaps are extension. And before takeoff, the check is given, so the pilot and the co-pilot go through the checklist, 15 green, and the Boeing aircraft can take off with no extension but require a much higher speed to do so. So, Delta Flight 1141, 1988, Boeing 727, the captain's airline. The airline was promoted as being where you hire the experts, the best pilots. These are the guys and the girls that are going to, mostly guys then, but are going to get you to the place at the right time, and they're the safest. In the days when there was a flight engineer, before flight takeoff check, the flight engineer reads 15 green, confirmed by co-pilot and pilot, but the plane crashes on takeoff, and that's what happened. 13 died. Or 18, 13 the paper, it said, but actually there were 18. The cockpit remained intact. The elevation revealed that in fact the flap handle was fully retracted. There was no extension of the flaps. The gauges read 00 and there was no light. These people all read what they expected to see, and they did it in a rote fashion without concentrating on the situation. There was a cofactor, there were numerous distractions in the cockpit, with the co-pilot talking to the flight attendant, plans for the destination. They didn't realise the destination was only going to be 300 metres away, but that's what happened. Now from this came the concept of the sterile cockpit. In the sterile cockpit there shall be no communications or actions other than those required to fly the plane, and remain sterile from aero bridge pushback to 10,000 feet and reverse on the way back in. Now I'd like you to compare that to your operating theatre. What happens? Sorry?
No, the final check becomes rote.
Well, not only does the final check become rote, that there are numerous other things happening. Let's say, so that they'll take the safety, the Gawande thing, the safety checklist that's meant to be in all the operating theatres. If to do it properly takes about 90 seconds. So how many times in your operating theatre will that 90 seconds be with everyone focused on the one issue, not doing anything else but talking to each other? 100%? 0%. Somewhere closer to 0%. And you know, there's an appalling lack of discipline, an appalling example that as senior clinicians we set, because we do not demand that happens. Now let's get back to culture. The culture of attention to detail and focus on the task at hand. Because we believe, you know, it's sort of a diffusion of responsibility. We're the professional, we know what's going on. All the other people in the operating theatre are not necessarily relevant. Completely untrue. And I think that in a sense we stand a little condemned of not embracing discipline around the attention to detail and communication and the creation of proper teams. Let's go on. Flawed communication involved any analysis of whether they're aircraft or medical or something else. Flawed communication is involved most of the time. I'm not going to show any other slides on this. I had a series of videos, but that's very much longer presentation. Now, where the 12.5% comes from, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's a number somewhere. Human beings speaking the same language, the same dialect, the same educational level, and the same professional pursuit do not understand each other. How many times do you have a conversation with someone and walk away thinking, gee, I'm not quite sure, I wasn't on that wavelength? Now, can you imagine when you start changing these things and adding in hierarchies, different educational levels, different attitudes and cultures, how often this could happen? It's frightening, actually, how pervasive that can be. Now, there are some strategies to overcome this, readbacks and repeat orders, another staff member, that sort of thing, but it's ever present. Somehow or other the format got altered here, but other factors in safety and performance. Now, this psychologist, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name correctly, but the concept of the power distance index, which is ever present in all the places in which we work, defined as the extent that less powerful members of organisations and institutions expect that power is distributed unequally, and also the people who are at the upper end of it really don't like necessarily to be questioned about that. So as members of the medical profession, particularly senior surgeons, we regard ourselves as up here, and then there's all these ones down here. So in these organisation cultures, subordinates have difficulty speaking up, wait for the superior to make decisions, do not pose alternatives, and lack assertiveness. One of the most spectacular examples of this was another airline incident. This was in Tenerife in 1977 when a KLM plane crashed into a Pan Am plane which was crossing a one-way in adverse weather conditions. Turns out that the pilot of the KLM plane was the chief pilot of KLM and the chief safety officer. Highest ranking guy. That's what happened. That's a recreation. That's the KLM plane, that's the Pan Am plane. That's a real picture of the aftermath. So There were numerous factors involved in this incident, but lack of communication, misunderstood words, the pecking order, the hierarchy that was obscuring vital information with assumptions not challenged. So the pilot had misunderstood a communication from the tower. The tower, the guys did not speak very good English. The co-pilot realised there was something wrong, but he could not find a way to challenge the pilot because the power distance index was too great. So 583 people killed in this single event, and it transformed the thinking of the airline industry. The traditional analysis, bad pilot, severe error, personal failure, weed out the poor performer, generally they do that for themselves. But if the best in the business could fail so badly, all pilots could do such a thing. All people could do such a thing. Need a change in thinking to reframe design from individual perfection to system safety and teamwork. So that crew resource management stuff emanated from the Tenerife disaster of 1977. So the idea was flatten the hierarchy. Now that doesn't mean you lose respect. Flatten the hierarchy, encourage communication. In fact, it becomes the obligation of even the least powerful person in the organisation to speak up if there is something wrong. Now compare that to what happens in your ward round, your operating theatre, your MDT, your M&M meeting. Is that what happens? Because if it's not, if that's not what's happening, we have the responsibility, and this is where, we can't leave it to the next generation, and you're absolutely correct. This is our responsibility. So, turns out in aviation accidents, in a typical crash, the weather is poor, so the conditions are adverse. Behind schedule, pressed for time. Pressed for time. How many times do we run into that situation when operating theatre? Quick, just you need to get this case done. You can only do it if you have a certain amount of time. Time pressure. But in a significant number, the pilot has been awake for more than 12 hours, or the two pilots have never flown together. Involves the 7 consecutive human errors. We're very familiar with that concept. And interestingly, the captain is more likely to be flying. The safest time in aviation is when the co-pilot is flying and the captain is actually not reading the newspaper or talking to the flight attendant. He or she is actually paying attention. That's the safest time. The reason that this is more dangerous, or traditionally been more dangerous, is because of the lack of assertiveness from more junior staff. And if that's the culture that's created, it is a far more dangerous environment. So then we move to a few other things. Authority bias, reluctance to challenge opinions of individuals of higher status of authority. Now, we actually create this ourselves. And we need to understand that this is what can happen, and we need to develop strategies to avoid it. Humans have strong emotional pressure to conform to majority positions, particularly when those positions are led by more senior and powerful individuals. So the higher status individuals create a higher likelihood of a subject agreeing with an obviously false conclusion. Decision fatigue. Now, this is a fantastic study here that was done in the Israeli parole system. In the Israeli judicial system, a prisoner looking for or wishing to get parole appears before a single judge. And what they did in 1,200 or so observations was they tracked the time of day, the researchers tracked the time of day with the likelihood of the prisoner getting parole. And what a remarkable study it was, because at the beginning of the day, there was something like a 65 to 70% chance of getting parole, random. And as the morning went on, what happened? The chance of getting parole immediately before a break was not all that good. So this was extraordinary variation in decision making, and the decision fatigue part of it was clearly present. And after a break, they went again, another break, so on. Now, I've been to MDTs. I had the privilege a few years ago of visiting the United Kingdom, so I was asked to go and visit specialist centres and comment on an aspect of UK surgery. And I went to a number of places and saw up to 90 cases being discussed in an MDT. There is no way that those 90 cases, at the beginning, they probably got a reasonable discussion, but towards the end it all deteriorated into chaos. And you know, what an extraordinary thing to do, in the belief that this was actually helping people. We can move on to groupthink. Minimisation of conflict to reach consensus without critical evaluation of alternative viewpoints. But this applies very much to things like M&Ms and MDTs. There is certainly the potential for bad decisions. Creativity is potentially lost. And this is worse if the authority bias is present. And what this means is that unless these things are chaired properly and everybody given an opportunity to speak and their opinion being listened to, that it ends up being the most powerful figure in the audience who dominates the conversation. And so in groupthink, actually the summation of the parts doesn't happen. And it's something that we all need to be absolutely aware of in the environments where it can take over, and we need to make sure that people are included and listened to. Normalised deviance, this is not the bizarre thing from Hiding Street, this is actually something that's alive and well in all aspects of our healthcare. Accepting deviations from appropriate practice, which, because no obvious harm happens, we accept it as appropriate care. Lip service to team time out. The chance of anything really going wrong is small. When it does, it can be absolutely catastrophic. But we don't need necessarily to engage. We don't see necessarily the bad things happening. Antibiotic prophylaxis at the wrong time, we can sort of keep going. Does anyone recognise this crew here? Challenger. This is called, that one, I think, was the first. So the Challenger disaster, the launch temperature, it turns out, with the shuttles was critical. A tolerance of only plus or minus 4 degrees. And this had something to do with the brittle nature of critical O-rings in low temperatures, and these O-rings were in the propulsion part of the shuttle. They began to launch in lower temperatures, production pressures, political pressures, all those sort of things. Things that creep in. And accepting deviation became the norm with successive incident-free launches. And on this day, they launched at a temperature too cold, and that's what happened. Spectacular, seen the world over within a very short time thereafter. So, this incremental creep, if you like. So, our attention to the detail of thrombo prophylaxis, thromboembolic prophylaxis, to antibiotic prophylaxis, to all sorts of things. Bracket creep and being a bit lax with it just keeps happening because we don't see, we don't necessarily know what the end product of it all is. And so the attention to detail in some of these things is a little bit insidious, but it's extraordinarily important. Hindsight bias, it's a concept we're all familiar with. Judgment of the likelihood, and there's two aspects to this. The judgment of the likelihood of an event is estimated as significantly higher when viewed in retrospect. We all know the concept of retrospectoscope. And when we look at something and go back and assess, this is why aviation is important, because they can do it because they know they can hear the conversations, they can read the technical data, and they can piece it together, not relying on witness statements and then attempting to make assumptions about how it all happened. And the evaluation of a process in retrospect is usually more severe when the outcome is poor. An example of that is the AFL Tribunal. Two identical acts, depends whether you're left or right-handed. If someone's concussed and taken off the ground, even though the process is identical and another person not so bad, the penalty is remarkably different. And it's remarkably different because of the hindsight bias and evaluation being more severe with poor outcome. So there was actually a remarkable study published in this obscure journal called Human Perception and Performance in 1975. And what, I'll get to that, what they did was, published in JAMA, 112 anaesthetists examined 21 cases involving anaesthetic outcomes. And they had matching pairs. And in one case, the real outcome was permanent, but they made it temporary for a matching pair, and vice versa. And then they showed this to these anaesthetists, created the alternative scenario, and the matching pairs were randomly assigned for review. And what happened was, if the original outcome was temporary, 67% of anaesthetists reviewing it said it was appropriate care. But if they changed, and all they changed was the outcome to permanent, the appropriateness went down to 36%. In other words, a massive influence according to outcome with identical processing. And the same thing, original permanent outcome, changed it to a temporary outcome, and far more likely to be judged as appropriate care. Now, this is extraordinarily important to understand this when we are reviewing. So for the college, we do reviews of the mortality order. And there can be identical things happening that don't end up in mortality, but it's not judged in the same way. When we do our own M&M's internal review, that sort of thing, this is highly persuasive. So the implications, unperceived hindsight bias can seriously impair our ability to judge the past or learn from it. Medical, legal opinions and litigations, M&M meetings, review committees, RCA, audits, modification, second opinions. Diagnostic accuracy is compromised by the knowledge of previous diagnosis when giving a second opinion. Tendency for investigations to poor outcomes in complex environments, including human error as a major factor, underestimating the influence of multiple stimuli received at the time. And so that's just yet another thing that we need to be aware of. Omission bias. We tend to judge harmful actions as worse than equally harmful omissions. It's an interesting phenomenon in NBA basketball matches. They've actually recorded that a number of umpiring decisions according to the time of the game. And the number of decisions that are made in the last 5 minutes or last 10 minutes is significantly less than at other times. And I'm sure the same thing happens in whichever sporting event. You can sort of measure that sort of thing. But it's an interesting thing that in healthcare, major deficits in quality of healthcare studies are actually errors of omission, not errors of commission. Now, we spend vast amounts of time credentialing people on what they're allowed to do. They're not allowed to do this, they're not allowed to do that. Or telling institutions, you can't do this, you can't do that. But actually, a big study published in 2003, Quality of Healthcare Delivered to Adults in the United States, developed 439 quality indicators across 25 conditions, and this was about 100,000 events. This was a big study. And what they found was that the appropriateness of care ranged from something like about 10% to, at best, about 80%. But it was averaged out at around 50%. Don't worry about the detail of this. It didn't matter which, whether it was preventative, acute, chronic. The answer was pretty much always the same. It was in the mid-50s. But the really interesting thing was that most of these errors were errors of omission. The right thing wasn't actively done. It wasn't that received care was not recommended and potentially harmful. That was part of it. But the much bigger part of it was omission. And this is sort of a bit of a blind spot for us, is not necessarily understanding that problem. The illusion of attention. I'm about to put you through another little exercise. We do not always see what is in front of us, even though it can be pretty obvious. For example, using a cell phone when driving, you're about 8 times more likely to have an accident, whether it's hands-free or you're holding it or whatever you're doing. That's pretty well well established, but all of us still use the top phone when we're driving the car. We are able to respond to usual events, traffic lights, the lights in the car in front of us indicating that they're braking. We do that all fairly automatically. But what we are not able to do very well at all is to respond to the unexpected. The police tell me that when they see a child run over on the road or something, that the association with that, with people not paying attention by trying to do something else at the same time, such as talking on a telephone, is really quite a high frequency, and the statistics would back that up. So we are so focused that we are unable to see other significant information. And we'll just do a little exercise here. So some of you have probably seen this, but
count how many times the player is wearing white pass the ball.
okay, who saw the monkey?
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla?
Who didn't spot the gorilla?
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla.
So a lot of you have seen this before, but
If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
so that happened right before your eyes, but I bet no one
You
saw.
often miss other unexpected events.
I bet no one saw all three things.
And that's the monkey business solution.
Did anyone see all three things? No,
Learn
no
more
one
about
does.
this solution and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
There's just a few more things. Confirmation bias. Tendency to interpret new information so that it becomes compatible with our existing beliefs, theories and convictions. When we're 20 years old, we don't necessarily have all these things well developed. We are more likely to accept new information that will shape our beliefs. When we get to grey hair and no hair and whatever else, we tend more to try and make things fit with how we view the world. We filter out disconfirming information and tend to search for evidence consistent with our current beliefs. It's a lot easier to do that. And in fact, looking at stuff and listening to stuff that is not consistent with our beliefs arouses or stimulates the emotional centers of the brain. And people have done dynamic MRI experiments to demonstrate this. So it's not just a cerebral thing, it's actually an emotive thing as well. So it impart an emotional response. Reduces cognitive dissonance induced by the contradictory information. Now there is a primary defence against this sort of error. And this is one that's not extraordinarily well developed in surgeons. A sense of self-awareness coupled with humility. Now how many of us would say that actually we have this well developed? Frightening. Narcissism is very overdeveloped in the medical profession, and within the medical profession overdeveloped further within surgeons. Now I suspect a degree of narcissism is necessary to function as a surgeon, but it's a very fine line between healthy narcissism and unhealthy narcissism, and it's very easy to step into the next arena. But this concept of self-awareness coupled with humility is a really extraordinarily important underpinning concept. And if you think about it for a while, this helps with the culture, creating the culture of inclusiveness and all the things that we would hold dear. Conditions which increase mistakes, that list would not be unfamiliar to you. Anger, fatigue, stress, boredom, distractions, interruptions, multiple tasks. We cannot, I do have a multitasking video, but it's not, I've taken it out. Time pressure. The hurry-up syndrome, it's not well studied in healthcare, but it's ubiquitous in everyday practice. And approximately 80% of all reported aviation incidents occur during high workload situations in which performance is degraded by need, perceived or real, to rush tasks. Something we face every day. You know, you've got to reduce length of stay, reduce length of stay. Those, they can't be overnight, they've got to be day cases. For God's sake. This is become so powerful. The financial demands that are now placed upon us to alter practice in response to it. Neat targets, length of stay savings, time-based rather than quality-based targets. So I'm going to finish with this last little bit. The arterial switch operation is an operation performed in children with a particular cardiac abnormality. It is quite a very complex operation. And there was a scandal in the UK in the mid-90s, the Bristol inquiry, because of extraordinarily high mortality in Bristol, where two paediatric cardiac surgeons were performing the operation with remarkably poor outcomes. Subsequent to the inquiry, Jane Carthy, a human factors researcher, was placed or visited operating theatres in 16 UK centres. She observed 165 operations, and she was working with James Reason, so that was the connection. There were an average of 7 events, sorry, that format exchange, but there were an average of 7 events per procedure, 1 life-threatening and 6 relatively minor. Half of the major events were compensated, 80% of the minor events were uncompensated. The number of uncompensated major events was a predictor of death, hardly surprising. But what was really fascinating was the total number of minor events was a significant predictor of death also. It was additive. So as each one of these minor events occurred, it eroded the ability of the surgeon and the team to recover from the situation. So when faced with other circumstances, their ability was eroded. The best compensators achieved the best outcome, and the ability to achieve compensation was adversely affected by the total number of events. So that's just an example of some of the minor events. I'll pass over this. But she identified these behavioural markers of surgical excellence. This is really important, behavioural markers of surgical excellence, technical skill. We focus on that enormously, it is but one. Mental readiness, cognitive flexibility, anticipation, safety awareness, communication style, the ability to draw people with you, to not yell and scream, the situational awareness, team adaptation. And 4 of the 16 surgeons performed at a higher level. They rated highly on all the behavioural indices. They made fewer errors, they made more compensations. They were highly adaptive to unplanned departures from normal. They tended not to show stress. That doesn't mean they didn't feel it, but they tended not to react. Whereas, and this is the 16 surgeons, and this is, so these are major compensated, major uncompensated. There was 1 there, all the rest not. So this 4 stood out, but they stood out as much because of this as anything else. So the lesser performing surgeons also rated consistently across the behavioural characteristics with less well. They were less likely to make compensations, did not generate new hypotheses to solve the problem, were more likely to develop cognitive tunnel vision and commit fixation errors. And the teamwork within the theatre was not evident. The hospitals, so there's effects of team and organisation. The hospitals in which the 4 high-performing surgeons worked prioritise clinical over non-clinical goals. Now, wouldn't that be something? Consultant surgeon present from beginning to end, policies to reduce potential distractions, non-case related communications, number of external observers. So this is the final, this is the summary. Understanding of human factors, and this is an educational forum, so understanding and teaching by role model example and whatever other methods we can use to teach, and simulation and rehearsal are most certainly one of those. A beneficial understanding how to maximise safety and performance in healthcare. We need to develop systems and behaviours to prevent, minimise and track errors. It's not just technology. Individual contribution to performance is heavily influenced by the culture of the organisation, which is something we've heard about. As surgeons have the responsibility to understand these factors and improve the workplace. We spend many hours learning new procedures and how to use technology. We, as a group, tend to be really turned on by the latest and greatest and the biggest and the best and the new toys. But actually, it's the attention to detail and this sort of stuff that really makes the difference between success and failure. We have the potential to significantly improve quality and safety purely by behaviour.